for those few that may not have heard of ZeroEyes, I think it'd be really a good idea to kind of open up with your all's story from active duty years to the point you're comfortable discussing it. What did you guys really do? And
Sure.
kind of what made you guys want to do gun detection and ZeroEyes? So give us a little background, and then, of course, what your role is at ZeroEyes.
So I'm the COO and one of the co-founders, so I do operations. So all of this is a we, but it's a lot easier to explain it from an I to start,
Yep.
right? Because where everybody else came is similar, but not quite the same. So all over the place, how I grew up, I think is critical to understand why I'm doing what I'm doing. So I grew up in a town called Monroe, Connecticut. Basically a suburb-ish of New York City, I guess, maybe a little bit further out. But I went to a middle school that was called Chalk Hill. So I went back and forth between, public and Catholic school throughout my life. So my middle school ended up getting renamed, like they mothballed it and they renamed it Sandy Hook Elementary School. So Sandy Hook was in Newtown, which touches Monroe. And, they were, I don't even know that to say that I was rivals with Newtown. Like it was so close that like I kind of I led part of my life in Newtown, Connecticut. So that was my neighborhood. The school was, I think, an identical building, and they took all the kids after the shooting. They bulldozed that building and they brought them to where I actually went to school. Which is to say that I thought, growing up, I thought it was a boring town. I wanted to get out of it. I wanted something more exciting in my life because it was safe. There was, nothing really happened there. I think it was an unextraordinary place, right? And that's just, growing up. I don't think that anymore. But it was an impossibility that the evil could happen like where I was from. Like that was insane. I graduated high school in 1999. From the top floor, I went to high school in Fairfield, Connecticut. From the top floor of my high school, you could see the World Trade Center. You could see just the top of the New York City skyline across the Long Island Sound. It's like on the water kind of ish, right? So I went to the University of Arizona, and in April of 99, Columbine happened, and I started college in August of 99, I guess, the end of the summer. I went to school with kids who were in the Columbine shooting. And like they would tell stories. They were a little bit celebrities. I don't know how many of them necessarily went to the University of Arizona. One of the shooters was enrolled there, apparently. I learned that subsequently. But it was so ingrained in us what happened that day. And I was literally in a class of 300, a lecture. I don't remember what the course was, English 101. It's something where they have like 300 people in a room, and the conversation somehow was adjacent to Columbine, and somebody raised their hand. They're like, I was there. And then for 45 minutes, we heard Columbine stories and, whatever. People were like crying in the classroom. So it was an indelible mark. So I ended up going to Spain for a study abroad in the fall of 2001. September 11th happened. And that was, the Pearl Harbor of my generation, I suppose. I don't know that there's a better way to describe it. So there was a lot of things that I was going to do with my life up until that point. I did end up finishing college. So I graduated in 2003, and I ultimately ended up in the Navy. And so there was a lot of ideas. I was going to go to the FDNY, the NYPD, and all these things. And I ended up getting hired into the NYPD, but there was like a 12-month wait period. I was going to go to law school. I was enrolled. And then I said, I'm going to enlist in the military. I'm going to serve my country, and a little bit for revenge, if I'm honest.
Sure.
So I went to the SEAL teams. I had, maybe Charlie Sheen did too good of a job of brainwashing me, or whatever the case is, right?
Yeah.
I read all the books. I saw the movies. I'm not cooler than the pop culture. I grew up with, thinking Die Hard, that John McClane was real, that, Arnold Schwarzenegger, whatever his role in Commando was as an officer. I guess that stuff left. G.I. Joe, superheroes, idealism, Catholicism, all this stuff combined. The military is for me, right? And I met a lot of our founders there, right? And so Mike Laff, I ended up going through training. He didn't make it through the first time. He ended up a new guy in my platoon, but so I've known him for a long time. A lot of the other founders were in like platoons and we worked together. And they became brothers. And I met my wife when I was deciding what I wanted to be with my wife. I've been with my wife for, roughly 20 years, I guess. And then, we have 4 kids at this point. We also got married in a courthouse. In the military, you very often do 2 weddings. One, so that you can get better pay and like death benefits and stuff like that, right? Like that's the reality. And then you do one for the family. So where do you go for the one that's just by yourself? So you go to the courthouse. So I went to the courthouse in Virginia Beach. We signed, a certificate. We were married. That same courthouse, which we lived a quarter mile from, had a mass shooting that made national news. And so these things have occurred. They're supposed to be extremely rare, and statistically they are. But in my life, not in the most direct ways, but like I was affected by it. And I ended up staying in the SEAL teams for about 10 years. My wife was pregnant, and then I was fortunate to have to go to a nice business school. So I was like, do I make this more of a career? I saw the fighting dying down, and I liked to fight. I could justify being away from my family if I'm fighting a war, but not to train. So I had interest in, pursuing my NSW career, naval special warfare, and going to the highest echelon. But if I'm going to do it, I'm only going to train, and like that's not that appealing. So I got out at that point. That was the mark, about 10 years. My wife was pregnant. I went to business school. So I went to business school in Philly. Mike Laff was a year ahead of me, so he had gotten out. We went to business school together. And it's what a great opportunity and things that I learned. But I didn't have a tribe anymore. I was going 100 miles an hour in one direction. I get out and it stopped and it's quiet. And I found business school very difficult and overwhelming. It's great. School's great. You learn a lot. You're exposed to a lot of different people. I stayed mostly with the veterans because I could speak the same language. But it was even difficult for me to talk to people who didn't do combat or operations in the military. It's just I didn't speak the same language, and they were trying to be investment bankers at Goldman Sachs or something, and that wasn't an interest to me. And you went through it, like I struggled, and it was really hard. I didn't really like align with people. I saw a weird self-interest, and you said that Petraeus said that he didn't know his value. And I felt like a lot of those people did, and maybe I didn't, and I couldn't associate. And like, I had to learn how to transition, and I wasn't that well equipped, it turned out. And I thought that I was. Like, I went in well-adjusted, I thought I had a great career, but like I started getting really depressed. And then ultimately I took a job with Amazon. And I think it's a really cool, innovative company, and they are. But for whatever reason, I did operations. I was in a warehouse. I really struggled there emotionally. I think I was effective at my job, but just to ship more boxes and to do it more efficiently, it didn't scratch an itch, right? It didn't serve a greater purpose than myself. I didn't feel. And some people I worked with were very good, but I thought that there was a selfishness and a thing that I couldn't align with. In any business, there's going to be people trying to climb a ladder and step over people. And I felt that there was probably more of that than I had anticipated. It was less team oriented than I thought it was going to be. And look, I'm not saying the whole organization. I'm saying,
yeah, sure.
I felt that way at that time, and maybe I was wrong, but that's how I felt. And I didn't want to wake up anymore. Like, I didn't want to go to work. I was numb to the world. And that's when the Parkland shooting happened. And we looked at it, and I was friends like, dude, what are you doing? And we had all special operations, Ivy League MBAs, great jobs, and we were all kind of depressed. And we're like, what are you doing next? What are you doing? And then we watched this. You're like, man, that was a disaster, right? They're like, did you see the video cameras of that? Like, the shooter was on camera for a long time, and like nobody did anything. And then there was an aha moment, and they're just like, we should watch the video cameras. They're like, we'll use AI to do it. And we don't know that much about AI.
And this was what year? 2015?
2018.
18? Okay.
So I had gotten out in 2014, 2016, graduated, working 2016 and 2018 Amazon. And then ZeroEyes followed. And so we were all kind of like kicking around this idea. And then finally our CEO, Mike, was like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to start a company. And like, there was an idea. There was other people who were kicking around other things. You're like, no, we're just going to do this. And like, we're hanging out all the time talking. He's like, do you want to do this with me? And I was like, yeah, I need a mission. I need a purpose. This makes, based on how I had gotten to that point, it made sense to me. And obviously Mike had a different experience of like why he decided to do that. And then, Dustin, Sam, and Tim, we all came together, and Mike pulled in Tim, our CTO, is he wasn't in the military, but he's an unbelievable technologist, basically, I guess, for lack of a better term. Like, he just solves problems, unbelievably smart. And Mike had actually worked for Tim. Mike was 35, Tim was 20. And when Mike was at business school, he worked for Tim doing computer vision company. And Mike walked away being like, that's one of the smartest people I've ever met. And so when he's, trying to be like, let's get the gang together, he's like, oh, Tim is going to be the guy. Tim is the guy. And so, we kind of came together and we started with very little. And, we were doing basically engineers on more or less like Fiverr, like one of these, you pay somebody hourly. And for some reason, some of those people worked in a way that like you couldn't even hope for. You're like, wow, we are aligned. And so that's kind of how it started. We did it the first 2 years. We didn't pay ourselves. We literally like were in his basement doing that, going into debt. I borrowed money from people who were other veterans who knew that I was having a hard time. Mm-hmm. And, people helped me, people that I loved took care of me. And, we were able to raise money and start to pay ourselves a little bit. We were able to hire more people. And we basically hired only missionaries rather than mercenaries. We're about 80% veteran. A lot of the engineer roles are difficult to fill with veterans, but we've slowly built our company, and a lot of it was us. And we're like, how do we do this? How do we annotate? How do we create AI? And like idiots running into a wall, we kept trying ourselves, and we just A and B tested everything. What if this works better? What if this? So Tim would organize us, and like, I don't code, but there's I grew up building computers because I played video games and I was a kind of a geek, I was a good athlete. And so I made it in the military, but I was a little bit of an anomaly. Like I would, the GPUs and CPUs, I built all my own PCs for years. And like, I would, try to run Half-Life 2 at more frames a second or something just so silly, but somehow that actually transfers. And I was like, I could do all of like our computer builds. I can end up doing this, and I can do a bunch of technical stuff, but not necessarily code, right? Like but I can help. And then we figured out how to make this algorithm better, how to improve it, how to record more data. And we just realized that data used on the internet didn't work. So we had to record our own. And so we started doing that. We built the minimum viable product, and then we started building, and just, we had intention to have other people monitor it, and like it just didn't work the way that we wanted. We had to learn. Right, frankly, we were bad, and I couldn't afford to pay somebody else. That was my intent. We're like, what if we do this internal? And so we actually, wasn't our original intent, but we monitor all of our cameras, for false positives, and we built that. We do it with veterans, and we built an operations center, and you just meet people who you're like, that person was awesome. Let's bring them in. That person was like, who's good at statistical analysis? And I was like, oh my God, I worked with this person at Amazon. Incredible. Let's bring them in. Will you do it for almost no money? You're like, I guess. And slowly that's how we cobbled our company together. And then eventually you start asking, we need some money. So you ask your friends and family, and they give a little bit. And then you put everything on credit cards, and you borrow money. And then you pitch every day of your life. And then finally you find an investor who believes in you. And that's kind of been our journey. So that we literally started in our CEO's basement. I lived in Philly, so I would drive up, but Tim didn't live in the area. So Tim would sleep in a hammock in Mike's basement. Dustin Brooks would also, because he didn't live in the area, he would come up and like sleep on his couch. So we would buy computers, like Alienware video game computers, and do that in the basement. So like there was like 3 people in his basement in his house with all of his kids. And like, we would be in his driveway with guns walking around, and like, to try to trick the model, we'd have, tennis rackets and lacrosse sticks and like kids trucks and stuff like that. And that's how it started. And now, we would go to, veteran accelerators. We would go to, we worked for public meetings, but, to make ourselves look bigger than we were, we would do that. And then we were fundamentally, really in his basement. And, now we have a big office that we have like a pretty, I think, relatively state-of-the-art monitoring center. And it all started with the smallest thing, baby steps all the way, A/B testing. Hey, this doesn't work, let's try this. Hey, this doesn't work, try this. And it was just like, we were going to a high school let us in. So we would go walk around every day that they had off. We would go in with guns and record ourselves and see how well we could detect. Christmas Day in a high school in New Jersey, just because they were like, yeah, we're okay with this. And we went to a water park during the off season. They're like, yeah, we'll let you record all this. Is anything, anywhere we could go to do it, that would let us. And so, there's super long hours. We're like, is this going to work? We're like, I don't know. It seems to a little bit. And so we took baby steps all the way through and started building a team, found the right engineers. Then the other engineers brought their friends in, and it's been a ride.
Wow. First of all, thanks for, personalizing that, because that is one of the things that in my circles in retail, makes you guys special is the number one veteran owned, founded and led business. But, to be able to be that open about it and the struggles you guys went through, both, transitioning, losing the tribe, I get that. And, that's something a civilian will never understand. And I have to be careful sometimes in my own circles explaining that, because it can come across as abrasive. I'm like, look, you never wore boots, so just listen, don't judge, because you've never done it. But you do have that void when you get out of void of purpose. When I first connected with you guys, it was 20, I guess. And I started seeing stuff on LinkedIn. And so at the time, the sales guy, or the guy that was doing the posts, pinged him, said, hey, have you ever talked to a certain retailer that I'm affiliated with? He's like, yes. I'm like, okay, a little more would be helpful. So it was a back and forth, and we engaged, and that was the beginning of our relationship. Because when I retired from Walmart in 17, so all the listeners, most of them know my background, 12 years active duty, got out, 95, went to Walmart and stayed there for 22 years. It was probably 2017. I was on a bike ride, killing time. And one of my former bosses at Walmart called and said, hey, we know you have connections all over the place, MIT Media Lab, all these smart guys. Here's what we're looking for. And they explained exactly what you do. And I remember I kind of chuckled, and they said, yeah, I know, but that's something that we are looking for. And I'm like, you know what? Okay, I will, jerk some chains and see who in my network is doing something with that. And everybody I talked to, whether it was DARPA, whether it was, of course, I'm classified at DARPA, the MIT guys, Caltech to a degree, Auburn, a number of NIST, everybody pretty much came back with the same answer. Hey, great idea. Yeah, but it's on a whiteboard. We're not there yet. AI is not there yet. And fast forward, it wasn't even a year that I engaged with you guys. In the first conversation I had with Sam, we were talking back and forth, and I'm like, you know what? I love everything I'm hearing, but I see the weak link in the chain is a human in the loop. So if I'm a retailer, we say we got to automate all that. And then that was before I came up and sat down and spent half a day with Sam. I walked away saying, shit, that's your competitive advantage, if there are competitors, is having the human in the loop to assure there is zero false positives going down the pipe. So primarily that's what makes you guys unique. The veterans, the passion you guys put in the business, and you're one of the damn few firms, coming from retail perspective, that is truly in the business of saving lives. A lot of people will say that, fire alarms, I get it. Panic alarms, everybody's got to have a tagline. but you guys truly are in that lane of that's exactly, and all you do is detect weapons to give precious reaction time before something really bad happens. So what was your growth cycle? So you said you have somewhere around 120 guys or people. Did you have a spurt in there? So 2018 to 2024, where was the spike and it really started getting traction? Because you guys are, by my outside looking in, are killing it in K through 12.
Right.
Retail's been a struggle. I get it because they're just a pain in the ass most of the time to deal with.
It's expanding a lot right now. So, I think a lot of them won't let us use their names because they don't want to be viewed in that way, but that is starting to expand now. So that has been a harder process, but we're certainly in retail. I don't know that anyone, what I would say is that COVID was very difficult.
Yeah.
So 2020, when we met, the odd thing is that people were willing to talk about us, but the whole world shut down basically. And they're like, well, no one goes to stores anymore. So stores are safe, and no one goes to schools anymore. So the first year that we didn't have a school shooting was when we didn't send kids to school. Right. And like mathematically, it doesn't matter. However, I think that the difficulties and the anxiety that were at that time, and like the uncertainty, people knew that this was going to be critical. So we didn't go away, but our growth, when we started to be like, oh, we're starting to get a little bit of steam. And I don't remember when we got our first check that like our first investors, the first people who believed in us was probably like right before that. And we're like, oh, we're going to grow so fast. And then basically, every company in the world stagnated. Right. Yeah. But we didn't stagnate the same way other people did. They're like, look, go on our headquarters. And I think probably we met during like that.
Yeah.
During that kind of thing. And a lot of people were receptive and like, look, when people start coming back, we think that like society is a little bit different now. And it was, and like more of those things started occurring, in workplaces, they call it the insider threat. If you get fired, and there's a love triangle, you have badge access, where your office works, and people were afraid of that. And so we had a lot more reception of that. So in an uncertain world, security is going to do a little bit better, right? And that was not our intent. Like it really started in that K through 12 mindset, and just realized you could apply to a lot of other things. So maybe like 2021 ended up becoming really good. And then, whatever we raised, our A round was probably somewhere around there. We were able to put more capital in and like hire more people and, pay people a little bit better than the nothing that we were basically giving before. And then it has been fairly steady the whole time, right? Like there have been little things, but like we are still waiting for like that hockey stick of like, oh my God, what are we going to do? Yep. And perhaps, it's this year or whatever, but it's been pretty incremental and positively forward and growing, even though, every day it feels like, 2 steps forwards, 1 step back for a variety of reasons.
Sure.
And the same way that like, I totally agree that the operations center and the human in the loop is an advantage. And when we first did it, we didn't think it was. You're like, oh, this clearly needs to be automated. And you're like, maybe it doesn't.
Was me. Yeah.
I know. And because it was counterintuitive. And then like, I was like, well, I'm going to pay a third party to do it. And I researched them. There's really good companies that do it. But like, there's a lot of things that you don't learn. And we also can like change our levers when things are good or bad to like be better. And if you pay somebody else to monitor for you, you lack that. And there's lessons that you learn and they're like, oh, that's funny. We didn't know that. And the amount of times that has occurred because we monitor ourselves has been profound. And then the people who are good at doing that are good at installing, and like we can build people who don't have IT background and build them up and then teach them IT and perhaps teach them how to be developers and teach them how to go into machine learning. And we've started doing that. And that's been pretty cool that we've probably brought 13 or so people out of that room and like given them better career trajectories in machine learning and developing and all that kind of stuff. And it was unintentional at first. It was just a good idea. You're just like, well, we'll do it this way. It was like, at first it was a Band-Aid, and then it became a strength.
Yeah, I think that's your competitive advantage. because all the retailers I talk to and everybody knows that you guys we work together, that's one of the main questions. So how many false positives do you generate? I'm like, you never get any.
Right.
And we have a number for you, but if I'm the retailer, that's all I need to hear. I will never get a false positive. And when I do get an alert, it's the real deal. It's not a test. So,
or if you do, it's with like, we're going to show you that image and you're like, yeah, that's probably better safe than sorry. So I won't say that you won't ever get a false positive, but like, it's going to be really, really minor.
So, I was over in Germany. There's a tech conference, in my mind, one of the best on the planet, EuroShop in Dusseldorf, depending on which year it is. So the EuroShop is about 15 convention halls, over 100,000 attendees. And then every year, so that happens every 3 years, every year is just the tech part for obvious reasons. And that's 2 or 3 convention halls. And I go every February. And this year, the commonality in those conferences, be it NRF in New York, EuroShop, I'm going to see the same thing at RILA here in a few weeks, is AI is so overhyped that, you're just drowning in it. And the feedback I get from the retail people that I work with and are friends is like, shit. It's like we're throwing stuff against the wall to see what sticks, because we'll tell you, yeah, we can do it. But then, unsurprisingly, you get to the mat and it's like, no, you can't. Do you feel like, that, so from 2018 to 2023, that's 5 years, going on 6, I guess. No, this is 24. Do you see competitive pressure that you didn't experience in 18 and 19, because you're pretty damn unique, and now every freaking body's doing AI? My sense walking away from that German trade show was it's quickly becoming a lot more options. Whether they can do it or not, forget that, but there are a whole lot more players in the AI box. How do you read that from 18 forward?
So certainly, even in our space, there's way more companies that exist than in there really wasn't another company that existed at the time that we started. And then one was very early, and like it's totally different now. Fine. So I would argue the devil is in the details in terms of what you say you can do and what you can actually do. And like, we're doing it. And we've been doing it for, over 5 years.
Yep.
And, we're exhaustively pursuing and trying to get better. Fine. And perhaps other people are. The AI thing is, it's a tool. Right. And I think that as people are over-promising what this tool can do, and maybe under-realizing what it can do in other locations. Like, both of those things are occurring. I think the rhetoric is pretty silly.
Yep.
We still have people thinking that it can do so much more than it can do, that it's laughable. And then people don't realize that, like, it can write emails for you and like record calls and dictate things and like do things that are really useful that used to be take a lot of jobs, right? Or basically, like, if you want a note taker, it's awesome. It's great. Like, instead of spending your time doing that, you don't even have to think about it, so that you can think about better things, right? So the things that AI can do, we do AI, but we do computer vision. And computer vision is literally like processing video. And the only thing we're processing video is for gun or no gun. So like, it's pretty simple. We do object detection. The object that we're doing is gun. We define a gun by recording ourselves with guns. That's it. It's not, we are not doing, nothing is going to be self-aware. We want to respect privacy. We don't actually like monitor your live feeds. We just get the images that it thinks are like, it's a totally different thing. So I think it's being oversold in the capabilities of like, all humans will be replaced. That's absolutely not going to happen. When hammers, were first invented, did all of a sudden no one, the houses build themselves? No, they didn't. It was just a tool, right? Like anything like that, it'll just change the way that, we do business. And ideally, humans, instead of doing a monotonous task that is easily solvable, when a calculator came out, like, are humans worse at math right now? Maybe fundamentally, like adding in their head or something like that. But like, a calculator is a tool you should use.
Yeah.
And like, it would be silly not to, or a slide rule or whatever it is, so that you can solve more complicated equations, right? so that, what's in your head isn't memorizing, tables, multiple. We're beyond that. Let's go further and be more creative in ideas and solving. So I anticipate that. We're trying to solve one thing, and it's really this problem. Guns show up, people carry them and don't care, and nobody sees or does anything. And we have all these cameras that exist, and no one can watch them. So we're going to let AI do that one task. And we're going to give you time back, and we're going to solve for this one thing. And that's how we're, are there other use cases? Absolutely, there are. But our scope is extremely narrow. We're going to do one thing. We're going to be the best in the world at this one thing.
That's the second key point with at least in the retail circles was, number one, no false positives, and number two, privacy. And the oversimplification in layman's terms is all we're doing is grabbing a JPEG. We're not streaming your video because the privacy guys get involved and the lawyers, and then, as you well know, as do the listeners, everything slows down for good reasons. In that space, so you talked about being experts at one thing. In my now 30 plus years in the industry, I can't tell you how many presentations from overcommit, under-deliver. AI, it has thrown gas on that mentality. When I was in Europe and I'm talking to these guys, they're like, so I present, we have a pretty carved out, these are the pain points of retail. I don't need you to solve, clean bathrooms, make sure the lights work. We got people that do that shit. I need to solve, these are unsolved, but this is what I need solved. And the more we start looking at that, the more we recognize that, okay, no, that's probably not something I'm really good at. One is virtual customer service. That is an unanswered because, you talked about COVID. That changed a lot in retail operations. That was the toughest pressure cooker they've ever been through in memory to test both good and bad processes, procedures, and technology. Some of it went in the dumpster, and some of it they hit the gas on, like buy online, pick up in store, et cetera. But when they did that, so too did the risks associated with losses, not human life, but losses of, and as we well know, all the retailers listening will know that we're never going to go back to pre-COVID staffing levels. So, because if you're Walmart and you killed it during COVID and you're the finance guy, and I can say this, I work there and I'm, I don't have a filter with that, is the finance guys are like, well, shit, we did, pick a number, 10% comp sales with reduced hours, because they did, and pick a number, 15% less payroll. We sure as hell ain't adding that 15% back in. But in that is a compromise of efficiency of all of those manual tasks that were previously done, unrelated to this call, but it's showing up in retail shrink. And you're on LinkedIn, you see it. I've never seen numbers like that before. Bad. And to be able to say that this is the one thing we do, the virtual customer service, sure, ZeroEyes could probably do that. They could be on the cameras inside the store on the sales floor, and they see a person, they can alert somebody to come over and talk to them, because otherwise nobody's going to engage with them. What if you had to pick one thing, Rob, in the learnings from 18 forward, as an organization, what was one of the biggest challenges to get past? What was really the boat anchor in the sand?
So I think the challenge that we had goes over a lot of these things. So in order, you have to solve someone's problem. And a lot of the ideas that people come up with are literally the thing on the whiteboard, right?
Yep.
That I conceptually can do these things, right? Until the rubber meets the road and you start really, really doing it, you can't. So we had to convince, first of all, investors. So before you can really get a customer, you need, for what we're doing, we needed money in the thing. We needed people to believe us. And so we could show that we really could do this. We had a handful of customers, but before you start getting more customers, they're like, can you really do this at scale, right? And a lot of people were saying that, like, what about this analytic? What about this? What about this? What about this? We'd be like, no, we're just doing this one. you're like, but there's so much opportunity and no one wants multiple solutions. And like, I appreciate that too.
Mm-hmm.
But we're like, you know what, particularly for this, the risk is so high that we have to be scalpel sharp, and we have to mess it up a million times to get it right, and just do this. And it turns out that like a 80% solution in the computer vision world is like something that like a college could do in a day. Like you can convince people pretty easily, like with almost nothing, right? Okay, cool. A 90% solution will take you like 3 years. A 95%, whatever the number. Like there's no such thing as 99% anyway. But like just to give you an idea that like as close as you can get to like that perfection is literally going to take your whole life. And so some of the things that we realize, well, if we monitor, we can allow some of this a little bit looser. If we do it this way, if we do it this. And then, working with somebody's cam infrastructure, realizing how quickly mistakes happen of like, I don't know, how often do you restart your computer on a given day, right? At some given point, the number one IT thing is turn it off and turn it back on, right? That's like for anything. Number one thing. So I'm going to throw something out there. Cameras should also be turned off and turned back on at some given point. And literally are never like just it's not something. Nobody turns off all the cameras and restarts them. It turns out if you did that every 3 months, you wouldn't have any errors, right? But it turns out that no one does that, and it just sits by itself, and it's just like unseen. And until you start doing video analytics on cameras that are wonky, because like you restart your laptop maybe once a week, so that as soon as you realize it's getting squirrely, I'm going to turn it off, turn it back on, and it's all good. Maybe you should do that every day, and maybe different people do it different times. But like your cell phone, people just don't. Like,
it's on 24/7. Yeah,
for a month, and what you realize if you restart the thing, like everything works better. And cameras are like profound. And there was a shooting in New York City in a subway, and they realized 30% of their cameras weren't even on. And you're just like, yeah, you should have turned. How do I solve this? Turn it off, turn it back on, and like no one does that. So if you're in this space with an 80% solution, realizing that customers don't do that, and you're like, hey, what if part of our job is to poke you and tell you to do that? Hey, turn it off, turn it back on. And like, just something as stupid as that, but that is like the tangible thing that will make you better. And you're like, hey, we should actually test this like in person on all. Oh my God, that's terrible, but go do it. And then like, you're going to learn a lot of things. And if we weren't scalpel sharp, we wouldn't have learned to do that. And if instead we gave you a tool instead of providing you a solution, I don't think that we would be where we're at, right? And so I guess to answer the question is learning to provide a solution rather than giving someone a tool is completely different. And we had to learn to do that, and that was difficult. And I think that that's a difference maker because we were so laser focused on doing one thing and we need to be the master of one, not the jack of all trades, right?
Yep.
And by doing that, we've learned so much more. I do think a lot of what we learned is applicable to other things, but a lot of it was just like doing it at scale. Okay, go do it 10,000 times, go do it 30,000 times, go do it 50,000 times. And like, I think that's our advantage where we see a lot of these other competitors in the space. Like we have done it for real. We have done it when it matters. And like, there have been, things that were out of our control. Like what happens when ICE gets in front of cameras and it's just really, it was going to happen. And so those are things that your 99.99% effective rate. Well, if they're still in front of it, it goes to zero immediately. If there's sun shining on it, and until you start solving all of those problems, you're not going to solve this problem. So like we view ourselves as a solution rather than a tool. And that's the big difference, I guess.
So in the AI space, so obviously with my background in retail, and we already talked about, reduced staffing, that goes across the board for the asset protection guys, fewer people running down shoplifters, fewer people making sure the floors don't have spills on them. So AI is already, it's not, going to happen. It's already happening, is going to be much more significant of a technology solution in retail. It's already happened. I've seen it here at Walmart, living in Bentonville with all the stores. do you see that? So in all of your channels, you guys are in healthcare, you're in DoD, you're in K through 12, you're in retail, gaming, and I'm probably missing a half dozen more. In terms of adoption, so let me build the discussion with duty of care. So I learned that early on in Walmart in the late 90s when we had parking lot patrols were a new thing. Some person in a golf cart riding around the parking lot with a yellow light, and it made everybody feel safer. And we did it in certain stores, much less sophisticated back then than today for all kinds of reasons. But as trial lawyers like to do, they found a gap in a store we didn't have it in. And all of a sudden it's like, well, you did it in these other stores, you didn't in this one, so you're negligent. And that's when duty of care really began to be a major consideration and strategy with us and the risk mitigation teams is what happens if. So of all those channels, under the headline of duty of care, who do you think is, and again, Rob, like we talked before, if you choose not to answer, I'm cool with that. Who's doing a better job in understanding that duty of care risk? Because let's face it, if you've got 500 schools, you've got the stats probably in your head, Rob. The likelihood of an active shooter is 1 in whatever. What role does duty of care play in implementing technologies like this, by in particular a silo you have?
So I certainly think once you've experienced this and you realize never in my backyard, that's impossible, it wouldn't happen here. And I've told you, my background that it seems to happen here in my life more than zero, right? And so I think that when we pitch our thing, I think it's a lot more receptive. And for whatever reason, the K through 12 space is more receptive than perhaps others. And I think the corporate world is we're starting to get into, and it's more difficult because it's just budget, right? It's just one of those things. And how do we get in it? But that duty of care, I think the better that we get at it, the more ubiquitous that we are, the more people that we're going to catch. Now we've arrested a bunch of people, and there's a lot of things that have been very positive for us. And we've expelled kids who were doing bad things. We've caught nefarious actors. We have yet to catch the kid with the backpack full of guns and the manifesto. We have not caught that. But we've made a number of arrests, right? But the more cameras that we're on, the more ubiquitous that we are, the more that's going to happen, the more successes we're going to be able to point to, right? And I think that this will be kind of like a fire alarm. At some point in the future, I think that there will be features on your cameras that you're your duty of care, you have this exists. Is that 5 years? Is that 10 years? I don't know that answer. But because I think it's pragmatic. I think that hopefully when you view what we're doing, you're that makes sense. We're one layer. We're not the only one. We want to be less intrusive. We want to be privacy protecting. We want to be make you safer in one part of a solution. We can't ensure there's never a shooting. We can't. That's impossible. That's not what we're trying to do either. We're trying to do one thing really well, the best in the world that makes sense, right? And I think if we can do that, and we can prove it, and that we keep doing it, and we keep proving it, that duty of care thing, people will you'd almost be negligent to not use it that. It just makes too much sense. I can't predict what that is in the future. I would say, we have gotten further with schools initially. We're starting to, more retail spaces are starting to pick up. And part of that is COVID. Part of that is all of these other things, because kids went back and the stores weren't as fast as kids going back to school, just not. And then, shopping malls, whatever, are still not fully recovered. And a lot of stores are still not fully recovered because online picked up so much more. So it's different. So I think it's going to build. But that duty of care that you're talking about seems to be valued in K through 12 and whatever. And I think that we're starting to see it pick up in other places. If we can do it at the right cost, if we could do it at, you can get the trust, you can see the success stories. Mostly what we've dealt with is early adopters, right? People who see it, believe it, have better infrastructure, and see the value, right? And then we're still really early in what I think this will turn out to be. And the more that you see it, that duty of care will look at those early adopters, look at that early success, and then be like, you'd be negligent not to use this. That's what I think.
Yeah, that makes sense. And you mentioned what I was thinking. That the baseline, fire extinguishers, fire alarms, safety glass, emergency exit, seatbelts in cars since the '60s. If you had to make those decisions again, it'd probably be a familiar argument. Well, hell, what's the likelihood I'm going to have a fire? Why do I need to spend $40,000, $50,000, even more, putting in water pipes, sprinklers, alarm systems, connectivity? You'd probably meet that same resistance, but it is now ubiquitous, obviously, and you don't even think about it. All of those standard safety items are features are out there. So, and I'm not bashful about it on social media, the duty of care, because I lived it, in retail, that at some point, skilled litigation gets involved in saying, you've got ZeroEyes, you've got, all these other wannabes. That doesn't matter. The fact is there are options out there. You chose not to. And I'm not privy to what an active shooter event costs in real dollars, but I got to imagine at any scale. So, the active shooter that happened with Walmart in El Paso, and when was that? 2019. 20 odd people killed. I mean, just guessing, I wouldn't be shocked if the total real dollar payout was $100 million. Legal, lost sales, inventory, shutting the store down, fines. And in my mind, oversimplistically, but what does the annual subscriber cost me to do this versus $100 million? Because it's going to happen again. I mean, there is no abating to the 2A passion and people getting pissed off and feeling like they got to go kill a bunch of people. So I don't know either. I mean, neither one of us do. Nobody knows when it's become a thing, but I think it will at some point.
So I think, we have like calculators of what this is. And I think it's even bigger than that. I think the reputational risk, I think lawsuits. I mean, one of the ones that's kind of a little bit more publicly available on this is like the Las Vegas shooting, which is literally the worst one ever, right? And so like they settled a lawsuit for like close to $1 billion, 800 plus million. And that was just like money out, let alone like nobody's stayed at that hotel. And like that is a hotel that was at 100% capacity that just isn't. And then you're like, is it safe? And then you're just like, no, it isn't. And so how do you define that and be like, well, I don't really go to Vegas anymore. And you're like, that's terrible.
Yeah, you can't quantify that.
It's very difficult to quantify that. I'm sure internally they know that. And it's not, it's in many of billions, right?
Yeah.
And obviously like that's the worst one. So like that's not the threshold for anything. That's literally the highest thing and very specific case, whatever. So I wouldn't say that it's that, but like, unfortunately, we go to places sometimes right after it occurs and we don't ambulance chase. We don't do that.
Yeah.
We are the company that we are, and people come to us at this point. And so unfortunately, I've gone into a number of places where shootings have occurred and like I see people and I see like the despair and they're like, perhaps if we were there, we could have helped. Like I'm never going to second guess like whatever happened, perhaps help in some scenarios. And they brought us in because they view us in that light. Right. And you just see like the terrible effects and like, can you define that with money? No, I want to make this cost effective. We're not trying to like, I think a lot of people in this space get accused of the security theater or like trying to make profit off of whatever. That is not our goal. Our goal is to like make sense, do it in a way that makes sense, make people feel better, provide a solution that like takes burden off of you and makes you able to do more things. Like that's the whole point. And we think that if you look at it, we're like, oh, that makes sense. And if we can do it, in a way that like is cost effective or it's and it will, throughout time, because we use GPUs and all this stuff, we're going to get better and ideally cheaper. We have all this stuff is very expensive right now, but like basically Moore's law, the processing of it's going to get better and cheaper over time. And then COVID didn't allow for that because Bitcoin, whatever, which is weird, but that was hard too. But like at this point, the scalability of this should be more cost. We should both get better and more cost effective as time goes by.
Yeah, the dollar figure, any retailer for profit and through the emergency operations centers and accounting. I remember Katrina, how devastating that was. And a lot of retailers, Walmart, of course, was one of them. I don't know, hundreds of tractor trailers loaded with, water and blankets, et cetera, food, et cetera. And, they're accountable. It's a publicly traded company. So they have to be able to put a dollar figure on what that event cost, be it, insurance or whatever, it doesn't matter. So they all know what it costs. Obviously not going to disclose that, but, it's a simple, a simple implementation consideration. What do I spend today on event X? How much does it cost me to help prevent X percent of X? And it's, it doesn't take an MBA to figure that out. It's like, look, if I'm paying out, $1 billion a year in accident claims, and I have a technology that can help bend the needle on 30% of it, and it costs me 1% of it, I'm not sure it takes an MBA to figure out, what, that's a go.
Right.
But the resistance, so we have, keep an eye on, 4 minutes. So talk briefly, because we do have the hard stop, of all the silos you're in or all the channels you're in, I mentioned them, DOD, healthcare, et cetera, et cetera. You mentioned K through 12 is probably your most, what's the right word? The biggest customer base, if you will, the K through 12s. Talk for a minute about the implementation of ZeroEyes in a DOD scenario where guns are normal on a military installation, et cetera. Talk about that for a second, the complexity of implementing.
So the complexity is not, a lot of that is how it's networked and who gets the scene, and the fact that we're US based, we allow it. It turns out that really for like the entrances and exits, military bases, like not a lot of guns are actually allowed. And so you're not allowed private guns on a military base, right? Like that's not allowed. And so as someone who was, in the SEAL teams, guys carried guns in their cars, and like you'd get in a lot of trouble if they discovered that. Like you were not allowed to have that, right?
You're pretty much done.
If you have a guard who is there with a slung weapon in front of a camera, we have people who understand that like that's fine, and it's military, and there's different postures or whatever it is. For the most part, we either say gun or no gun. But the challenge of that is a little bit different. The implementation, a lot of times, like how it's networked, has to be more specific. But like it's more or less the same product, right? And because we're using veterans to do it, it's the understanding of what is and isn't acceptable. And even most bases don't have. They're armed, but it's like on their hip and stuff like that. So it's pretty easy to see, something raised in harm rather than something that is just part of the job, right? And the same thing, law enforcement in schools, a slung AR in a school is very uncommon. A pistol in a holster is common. And I would argue that in most gates, depending on their posture, they don't have slung ARs or like whatever it is, but they could. But like that's one thing. Like if somebody is pointing it, that's very different. The threat level, right? And so like it's just seeing that and employing veterans, but the use case is not terribly different.
So I'm glad you explained it that way. The value of having veteran staffed, you call it the ZOC, ZeroEyes Operations Center. They understand what they're looking at. So, in discussions, and I can't mention the retailer's name, but in discussions of, look, we can probably do the monitoring ourselves. And I'm like, well, let's talk about this for a minute. You've got, regular everyday Joes in there looking at cameras. At some point, they're going to look at their cell phone. At some point, they're going to go to lunch and say, hey, would you watch my 20 monitors while you're doing your 20? And instinctively, a veteran, for the reasons, Rob, you just shared, understand what the hell they're looking at, and they can tell better than any non-veteran what is a threatening scenario and what isn't, and be able to make a more educated alert decision, because it's you guys in the ZOC saying dispatch or archive, whatever the other option is, to send it back into the AI model. Okay, we're at the top of the hour. So I'll close out, Rob. Thanks a million, dude. I really do appreciate your willingness to go on a deep dive on your all's transition and the struggles you guys went through. As Matt and I and people that know me know what a huge fan I am. Keep doing what you guys are doing, man. This does make a difference. And increasingly, I think getting back to the duty of care, at some point, it's going to be as standard as buying toilet paper that you have to have in a public venue, ZeroEyes, or if there ever is a competitor that can match you guys. So greatly appreciate the discussion, dude, and have a good rest of your day. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me on.